Very good evening to our viewers in Guyana and around the world as we bring you our Monday night program on Globespan 24/7. This evening, we are very, very honored and privileged to have with us no stranger to the politics of Guyana, no stranger to the people of Guyana. Three outstanding sons who have proven themselves to be, in their own way, some of the greatest people that walked in our streets in Guyana, without, making them feel as if I am praising them. But these three gentlemen, and we are sorry Mr. Gonraj couldn't make it today because he had another appointment, but we are very honored to have with us Senior Counsel Mr. Timothy Jonas, Accountant and Attorney at Law Mr. Christopher Ram, and of course Chairman of the National Airport and Member of Parliament, Mr. Sanjeev Dattadin, all three prominent attorneys of laws in Guyana. Gentlemen, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Good to meet you.
And of course, we want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and to our technical specialist, Mr. Devin Bisu. Also with me is Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome to all the three eminent lawyers in Guyana.
Gentlemen, today's program is on politics, constitutional reform, and changes at GECOM. But I want to start with one question that really bothers me over the years. We know that the 1980 Constitution was preempted by a fraudulent referendum in 1978. Is there any way anyone can contest that constitution in the courts, that this is fraudulent, we have a fraudulent constitution, and for us to reinstate the independent constitution? Is that possible? We can start with Senior Counsel, Mr. Jonas. Tim, your mute is on.
As I certainly wouldn't like to be the lawyer trying to prosecute that claim. You have a constitution from 1980, so you're talking 41 years ago. And your alleged basis for challenging that constitution is that it was approved by a majority in Parliament elected by a rigged election. How on earth are you going to prove that? So I think you've got a long shot there. You may find a very optimistic lawyer willing to take it on. Maybe Chris or Sanjeev will. But I don't think you want to go down that road.
Sanjeev, what do you think?
Well, Charles, good evening to your viewers and yourself. It's not only that 41 years have gone and it's going to be a difficulty in proving it. For 41 years, this has delineated rights. The rights of every citizen has been founded upon it. The application of it is what has been, what we have been guided by, even in those 5 terrible months that we had to wait for an election result. That was the Constitution that we relied on. I don't think that the solution lies in attempting to go back and rehash something that is 41 years ago. No, there is no benefit to anyone. There might be, however, the opportunity that what you have, if you're not happy with it, or if you would like it to be changed, then you can amend this Constitution to make it or to have it pronounce upon the things that you would hope to see in a Constitution. So the solution doesn't go back, there is no benefit in going back, abolishing this Constitution and reinstating the the 1970 Republican Constitution or the 1966 Independence Constitution. There's no value in that. This is the Constitution we have. This is the Constitution that's been applying our rights, and if you're not happy with it and it is the will of the people, then it should be changed.
Yes. What do you have to say? Anything?
I don't even think it's worth discussing respectfully. For those of us who have witnessed the evolution of the Constitution to where it is today, if you look at the 66 or you look at the 70 or the 80 Constitution, but then remember late in the 90s, we had some significant amendments to the Constitution. So whilst the basic Constitution is 1980, it has gone through a number of changes, and I don't think you'll get past any corridor.
And I think you guys nail it. That question was asked many times. But in law, as you know, I'm not a lawyer. I did a little law in my accounting. But if something is fraudulent, there is no statute bar or time limit to go back to. But as Tim rightly said, to prove fraudulent election, even if international community would have said that the 78 referendum was massively rigged, to prove that in court might be a different arrangement. But gentlemen, even with the amendment to the Constitution, in my view, and maybe Sanjeev, you can start us here, the PPP and the PNC, they love this Constitution as is. The leaders of the party, not the people per se, the leaders. Why don't we change the fundamental articles in the Constitution, the election of the president, the election of parliamentarians, and so on?
Well, I don't know that the leaders like the Constitution in any unique way. The fundamental rights are the fundamental rights. The system of government which we have, or the system of elections which we have, is the basic system of the majority. So every vote counts in this current system. If you're speaking of changing the system and going to the constituency based, or going even far-flung along the lines of the Swiss or others that do a rotational thing, that's a whole different system. The Constitution that we have is geared for the system that we have in place. There are some amendments that are, some bills have been recently produced, and those are going to amend with a view of strengthening what were the perceived weaknesses that existed and that were exposed following the last election and in the lead up to the last election. But those systems and what the Constitution pronounced on is a system. You see, like you could do proportional representation, first past the post, all these various systems that exist for you to do during an election. Now, we have a system. This system was the system we inherited at independence. Now, it's a fair argument that we should change it, that we can go to constituencies. There is a fair argument. There are several systems of elections in the world. And if that is to be changed, it really does require the will of the people. A referendum will be necessary. So there is a lot more to do as it would relate to that. But to say that the present Constitution is enjoyed by any political leader, insofar as it relates to elections, all it does is it sets the markers and the markings that we need to have the system, the current system by which we elect leaders, to be in place. It's in that regard, I don't think that you can reasonably attack what the system is in terms of what it promulgates in the Constitution. If what you're saying is we need a different system, that the current system we have is not working and we should perhaps look at other systems, then that's a different thing. That means a wholesale change to what exists in the Constitution. It means removing what we have at present and replacing it with whatever system we decide that we want to do. But to say that it is beneficial, I don't think so. We saw during the last election just how difficult it was, with clear words of a constitution being played with, perverse interpretation being applied by people.
We will come to that. Sorry about that. We will come to that because we talk about remedies available in the Constitution, if there is. I don't know if there is, but you guys are the person who will help us here. But Chris, do you believe that the current Constitution as is, the PPP, the leadership, and the leadership of the PNC, they're very comfortable with this Constitution? In opposition, you want to change, but as you get in the government, it goes to the back burner. What do you say?
Well, you're quite right. In among or between the political parties, you always hear them talk about constitutional reform and constitutional amendments, and when they get into power, they ignore those things. On the question of the political system, I am strongly in favor of proportional representation, which is what we do have. We had first past the post. First past the post gives you some very anomalous situation. We just read of the passing of Son Michel. Son Michel had 1 seat in St. Vincent. The 2 other parties had 7-7. And you know what he said? Any one of you want me, got to make me the prime minister. So this system is probably fair. What has happened is during the course of various reforms attempts, there has been an introduction of some amount of geographical / constituency representation. The problem is we have never made it work. I don't think Sanjeev is a member of parliament. I don't know, Sanjeev, are you a top-up MP or you're a geographical constituency MP? I don't think we know that. None of the geographical MPs has an office. People can't go and make representation. So the Constitution has a number of good features. It's not ideal, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. But we really don't make use of what we do have.
Tim, you have anything to contribute to that? Do you think that our political leaders in the 2 main parties, they're comfortable with the Constitution? In opposition, they keep complaining about it. We need to change it, but in government, it's a different story. Your mute is on. Your mute is on, Tim.
There's no doubt that the Constitution was structured and designed by Burnham to give a lot of comfort to the party in charge. So it's almost impossible to get rid of the president if you don't like him. You got to find that he's insane and have him certified and need a percentage of votes to have him declared so and that kind of thing. You can't move the president. Conversely, the president with the snap of his finger or the leader of the opposition with the snap of his finger can declare that he's not comfortable with any member of parliament who he has put to sit in parliament and can remove that member of parliament. So power is consolidated. And the entire structure is geared to hold up the party who is enjoying power and to keep them in power and to give them centralized power. Any effort to decentralize the power has been resisted. So yes, you're quite right, Charles. I hear what Chris is saying about the constituency system. We don't have it, although we pay lip service to the fact that so many seats go to this electoral district and so many go to that. At the end of the day, because the top-ups mean that the party with the most seats wins, all of that becomes meaningless. And as Chris says, the result is it doesn't really matter if your seat is won in an area, in a geographic area, or by virtue of the top-up. What counts is if you got the most seats in parliament, and the rest is irrelevant. I disagree with Chris that we can change that either as individuals or members of parliament can change that in parliament as individual parliamentarians. It is what the system is, and the system is centralization of power. So that if the leader of the party doesn't like you, he can remove you. Whether it is a geographic seat or whether it's a top-up seat, doesn't matter. And that's where the problem lies. We have to find a way to decentralize that power, to give greater autonomy to our decision makers, including the individuals who are sitting in parliament, so that they can act on their conscience. They can do the right thing rather than slavishly having to follow a party line. The large tragedy and irony that I saw with the Charandas fiasco, when Charandas crossed the floor, probably the first time in the history of Guyana that has happened in a meaningful way. The response seemed to try to morally impugn him as if he betrayed something. But all the man had done was vote his conscience rather than blindly adhering to and slavishly following the party dictate. But that is what every parliamentarian, and in fact that's what every Guyanese needs to do, to think for himself, to decide what the right thing to do is objectively, not to blindly follow the party, not to blindly find excuses for the party and talk about lesser of two evils, but to recognize what the right thing to do is and to do it, whether you're in parliament or whether you're driving on the road. You need to understand that.
And I don't want, again, Dr. Rose, I don't want to preempt Dr. Rose's question, but what I want you gentlemen, if you don't mind tonight, is that identify for us which part of the Constitution, in your view, should be changed and what that change should be. We were talking about all the problems. We need solutions. And you are the gentlemen who have the solutions. Not necessarily your solution, your recommendation will be accepted, but at least there's recommendation. In terms of first past the post, I was going beyond that. I was saying for someone to win a constituent, they must get 50% of the voting in that constituent. If no one gets it, you go to a runoff. And in that way, the person with the most vote wins that seat, not necessarily 10 of us run and one gets 15% and they win and the rest get 10%. That does not represent the constituent. So in that context, I was talking about. Dr. Rose?
Okay, gentlemen, welcome to Globespan once again, and I'm very happy to have you all here. Let me jump right into politics, and this is hardcore politics. Third parties in Guyana and elsewhere. In most countries, third parties do not have a chance. They've never formed a government. Canada has a three-party system, but the third party has never given a chance to form government. It's only the Conservatives or the Liberals. And research has shown that in Guyana, third parties do not last for more than 2 election cycles, perhaps 2.5. The United Force, 1964, 1968, by 72, they were actually wiped off the map. AFC, 2006, 2011, 2015 joined with APNU. Now I think it's wiped off the map for that. Do you think a third party is needed in Guyana right now? Mr. Ram?
Well, I think more parties are needed. What we do have in our situation, you have practically both parties having been in government for approximately 28 years. I believe that, and I don't take this view that, look, we are locked in. Had the AFC not done what it did in 2015, our politics might have been very, very much different. Look, you mentioned Canada, you mentioned some others, but the whole of Europe, you have coalition governments, and maybe that's the kind of thing we need. But when you have a situation where 50 plus 1 is really like 100%, and where you have a constitution that says in one person, you have 50, if you look at section 50 of the constitution, the supreme organs of democratic power in Guyana shall be the parliament, of which the president is part, the president himself, and the cabinet, which he appoints. So it is still essentially a one person, and that is the Burnham feature of the Constitution. Now, I think, and Tim and I, we have had discussions on this. I believe section 11B is unconstitutional. It ought to allow, if you have represented, if it has geographical seats, why can't someone from that constituency go up and say, look, I want to be a member of parliament? So you could have persons, you could have a situation where a president cannot do as he wants by simply getting 33 out of the 65 seats. And if you did have a parliament that is hung, then maybe what you need is that at the first sitting of the National Assembly, you have a situation where, okay, show me that you command majority in the National Assembly, and that is where you derive your power. But with our constitution, the leader of the list, getting the highest number of votes, regardless if that highest number could be even under 40%, becomes the president and enjoys the considerable power in section 50, which can only be ameliorated or reduced if we did have a situation where you had, in fact, a minority government, and the government must therefore, the president must therefore appoint a cabinet. He must bring legislation that really appeal to the nation as a whole rather than just his own party and his supporters, which is what we've been having from time immemorial practically.
Mr. Jonas, you're the chairman for a new United Party. Am I right? Do you think your party stands any chance of forming a government in the near future as a third party?
I'd like to answer that, but before I do, I'd like to go back to your premise. You'd said that throughout the world, it doesn't work. I'm not sure I agree with that premise.
No, I said
Chris,
most countries.
yeah, Chris has pointed out that in most European countries, there's a lot of negotiation to form coalitions of many parties.
No, but it's not most European countries. It's just 9 European countries.
In
Israel is a major example.
Israel, for example, as you know,
Italy is an example too. But outside of that, France is an example, Germany. But outside of that, the rest of the countries are two-party system in Europe.
So, as you know, there are many instances where third parties play a central role, and a number of variables affect that. One variable, for example, is the power to negotiate and form coalitions after the election. If that was a factor, that immediately incentivizes a lot of small parties to campaign in the hope that after the elections, they might be able to band together and produce a surprise majority result. That is what happens in many countries. As I said, the centralization of power in Guyana has created a design deliberately by the two parties to create a monopoly by them, a duopoly, if you will, of the power, so as to squeeze out anyone else that comes in, so that ability to negotiate and form coalitions after the elections is out. The hoops that you have to jump through in order to even qualify to run for elections are very difficult. And the largest factor that we can never ignore because it stares us in our face is that we have two large race groups. So if we have two large race groups demographically in the country and only two parties, each party identifying with and representing one of the race groups, if you don't have a third party, you will have the perpetuation of race voting. And you just need to look at the last 50 years to see that that's exactly what has happened until the advent of the AFC, when temporarily there was a brief renaissance before the AFC did nonsense. So we have our own variables. But my answer to you, Euclid, is that if we only have the two parties contesting the election, then we will have race voting forever, because each party identifies with one race group and one race demographic identifies with each party. And that will be the only criterion upon which people continue to vote. Now, for those small minority who reject that, that is an intolerable state of affairs. And I reject that. And therefore, for as long as I have the energy, you're right, it might be one, it might be two cycles. Hopefully someone will come along and carry it forward. There's a nice group happening already within the party. There must be a third option for those people who reject that race politics and reject the perpetuation that we have seen for the last 50 years. So yes, to answer your question, win the election? Of course not. But the split in the vote the last time was 5,000. The split in the election the time before that was 5,000. As Chris has pointed out, you don't need to win the election. You just need a swing vote in Parliament. I've said this many times.
Mr. Datudin, given the fact that the PEP has just granted a 7% increase to public/civil servants without any consultation with the unions, many are calling the PEP a dictator. And many have claimed, from what I've been reading, that the PEP has gone back to its pre-2015 days. And only a third party can weaken the PEP and bring them back to a minority government like what happened in 2011. Do you subscribe to that?
No, well, There's several things you said that I don't agree with, but let's start at the beginning. Your premise of a third party and its value. Now, bearing in mind our system where the entire country is one constituency, a third party has different value than, for example, where they are constituencies. Trinidad, for example, has the experience of where they have constituencies, but a third party only splits the vote for which two of those three believe that they are uh, with each other or friendly to each other, which means that you're losing at the constituency level, which is exactly the problem that is experienced in Europe, in the countries that you've mentioned. But Italy and Israel have the problem in a very pronounced way. They have, respectfully, I think, the tail wagging the dog. Exactly what Mr. Ram said about Mitchell is what happens in Israel. The smallest party holds a base. The so-called hardliners are guaranteed to hold the balance of power. And they then are kingmakers with whoever they wish, and they direct that these are the policies you must have, which is why both sides of the main political divide in Israel have adopted a more hardline approach than they would have campaigned on. So these are realities that if you have more than, but it usually settles in a lot of democratic countries, it settles down to two. Guyana's experience is a little, because of our system, as one constituency, the country, it's a little different. Because what it does, what a third party will do is interrupt both of the other two sides of getting to 51% or 50.1, whichever you want to say. So 33 seats become more difficult to have. The only way that government will happen under our present constitution after that has happened, is by a minority government. Now, coalitions by our constitution, whether it is perceived to be agreeable or not, our current law is coalitions do not happen after an election. It must occur before the election. The reason or the reason that was promulgated for it is choice of the slate. So because it is that the leader of the slate picks the people who go into parliament, what happens, they say, is that the person who would be leader would not have any control over his minority colleagues' choices. That was the argument. Whether you agree with it or not is a different issue. But in our current system, without it being amended, there could be no collation in the sense that the world understands it. What would have to happen is there would be an agreement after the fact. Now that has happened in Guyana before, where a person in a party other than the elected party was in government. Mansour Nadir is the example. He was a member of the UF and sat as a minister in government. So there can be arrangements that are arrived at because it comes down to the vote. Now we have departed from the Westminster system, which Chris refers to, that says that you must command the majority in the parliament. That usually in the Westminster system is either to the Governor General, the President of the country, if they've done away with the Governor General, or the Queen. You're asked to whoever commands the majority in Parliament. But you see, we don't have that tier. So nobody is there to ask you if you could command the majority in Parliament. We don't have that extra tier or individual. Basically, what this comes down to is whoever gets the most votes gets the presidency. Now, if he gets the most votes, even if it's less than 50%, as in the Ramatar scenario, or less than 50% of the seats, he is still the president and can form the cabinet. He would have a challenge, as Mr. Ramatar discovered, in passing legislation and his budgets. It creates anarchy. That's what can happen and did happen then. Now, as to the role of any third party, fourth, fifth, or any other party, it comes down to the same thing. You've got to go out and get votes in the same way that all the other parties are going out to compete for votes. Where it lies in terms of when the count up and the tabulation is done is a matter for the people. The people will choose, and we can have all the various permutations of what it is. But the reality is, I am young in politics, but I will tell you, politics has taught me that listen very little to what you hear everyone saying. Wait until everybody does something. And then that is the only thing that matters. You can go everywhere and see massive crowds at rallies and there are no votes. That don't mean anything about votes. That is indicative of what support. In the last election, we saw the now opposition, APNU's style of rallies involved a lot of musical performers and more of an atmosphere of that. People might go to it for only that purpose. You don't know. But the reality is, don't prejudge until it's done. And
Okay.
don't underestimate what political power is and what political influence is at every stage that you're there. But your premise is a third party would be the solution or the savior of the country. I don't see it that way. I don't see that a third party is any of those things. A viable third party to represent the interest of people who believe that it represents their voice is always useful. You cannot deny that. If they are a certain, or if they are programs or policies that people would like to see that a smaller party or a third party is to come up with and cultivate, then that's their voice. That's what they're trying to get. So that would never be to the negative or to the loss of any citizen. But to
Okay.
say that a third party is the savior, a la the salary increases and that it's dictatorial. It's difficult in an environment where a government in engaging or attempting to engage is met with so much that have to do with everything else except the subject matter of the negotiation. It is impossible that you take that when you take a stand on something that is so far-fetched from reality that it makes a discussion useless. Then what is the government to do? The government will go ahead and do what it can do for the civil service and for the people, as opposed to wait and go around in circles or to engage and go through rhetoric about everything else, about listening to people say whether the government is legitimately there, about listening to say about this one did that, and saying things where opposition and all will say things that about whether the government is installed or not. How can you have a discussion with that?
We're gonna come to that later. Just hold that point.
Yeah, my
Let me ask.
point is, you said that it was indicative of being a dictatorial government.
No,
No,
that's based on reports I read. That's what I
but
said.
how can you come to that conclusion? What it was is a government deciding that this is what we can do about the salaries of the people. So the government has decided that we can do better for the people, and we have done so. If you're saying that, well, you should speak to the unions, you have to be able to speak to somebody who's willing to engage. If people are not willing to engage, what are you to do? Do nothing for the citizens? Don't give them any of the increases because nobody wants to have a discussion meaningful about it? That couldn't be right.
Point well taken. Now, Mr. Ram, do you agree that coalitions, the present constitution restrict coalitions, that they can be formed after an election? No country I did the research, I haven't seen any country where such restrictions are in place, where coalition cannot be formed before or after an election. Do you think that part of the constitution should be changed?
I'll get back to that, but I'm troubled by what my friend Sanjeev said. And as Sanjeev said, he's new to politics. But the PPP, whether the unions are anti or not, and don't forget you got Gau doing the same kind of thing on the other side. after the experience in 1999 with the Armstrong Arbitration Committee, the PPP is clearly not prepared to engage in any form of negotiations with the public service. Now, I'm not a defender. As I said, I don't know if Patrick Yard lives outside this country some of the time, or probably most of the time. I'm no fan of that, but we have a collective labor agreement. And how could you abandon this because you think, oh, I'm the government and I will do what I think is possible? That is a very slippery slope on which to embark. Sadly, TNC, the APNU AFC, did exactly the same thing. And it doesn't help us as a country of rule of law and embrace of the Constitution when we decide, okay, when it's convenient, we will follow the Constitution. When it's not convenient, we just ignore it.
No, Chris. No. I got to correct you. The collective labor agreement that exists, when does the engagement have to happen? Before an increase is given? Is there any requirement that you know of that requires engagement before an increase is given?
Mr. Dutterdin, that is the essence of a negotiation. You negotiate.
You are
Finish.
You are mistaking it that there will be no consultation. That is your assumption. That is your assumption. Time will tell whether that is so. But let me tell you my understanding. And if I am wrong, fair enough. But it doesn't say that you have to wait before you give an increase. It says whatever is the final figure and what is the last agreement on it. Yes. But that doesn't say there is no consultation, Chris. Time will tell.
Sir, as I said, time has told for the past 22 years. There have been no consultations taking place. And I'm not saying the PPP alone, Sanjeev. Don't get too defensive. I'm talking the APNU OFC did exactly the same thing.
I'm not talking about history. I'm talking about now. And I'm telling you now about consultations. Wait for it, Chris. Wait for it.
No, listen, negotiations are of salaries and conditions. If the government were to say that, look, our opening gambit in a negotiation is 7%, union, come let us sit down and talk. I can take the point that Sanjeev is making. All that we have heard is that, look, this is the amount that will be paid, period. You raised the question of coalition. Now, as Tim correctly pointed out, our Constitution provides for this mechanism called the joinder. There is nothing, assuming you've got seats, and this is the practical side of it now. I mean, at one time we thought Schuman was in a coalition with the PPP in this parliament. So there's nothing that says if you've got seats, you can't then get together with others who also have seats. But what our Constitution does not allow, as in the case of the president, once his list gets the plurality of the votes, he becomes the president, regardless of whether everyone else in the National Assembly say, yes, we're going to get together now, as perhaps the AFC and the APNU did during the Ramatara administration. But the president remains determined based on the plurality system.
Mr. Jonas, let me go to you. I said before that no country has a system in the Constitution whereby precluded a third party or parties to form a coalition after an election or before an election. Do you think that part of the Constitution should be changed to allow to remove all restrictions now where and when or how and when a coalition should be formed?
And Euclid, the conversation started to get interesting around 7%, and there was a back and forth between Sanjeev and Chris, and I patiently waited my turn. And now you've left me out. Why would you do that to me?
I'll bring you back on that.
You
So
know,
go ahead.
I'll answer your question and I'll ask you to allow me to discuss that 7%.
Okay.
But to answer your question, I had previously believed and argued that in Guyana, we should be able to form coalitions after elections. I believe Chris is of that view. But at the end of the day, we have to think about doing the right thing by our supporters rather than the expedient thing. And it's nice and convenient to be able to have a little gathering and wrangle negotiations and find yourself with 51%, so you've won by coalition negotiation after the elections. But politics in Guyana is so divisive and so fundamental to us. We feel so strongly in our animosity to the party that we feel doesn't represent us, that I believe that we would be seen as betraying a lot of promises if we campaigned in an election and then after the election was over, we went and talked to those same evildoers that we've been cussing down during the whole campaign to negotiate with them for a coalition. Our politics is a politics of extremes. It's not a politics of nuances. It's not a politics of little nudges. It is a politics of you represent half the country and we represent the other half of the country. And there are a lot of people who voted for AFC because they were disillusioned with the party of their ethnicity, whether it was APNU or PPP. But they would never have crossed the floor to vote for the other party. And as soon as AFC became subsumed, they went back home. AFC would have betrayed those people if AFC had negotiated with one of the parties as they did. And in fact, the first I heard that AFC was negotiating with APNU way back in 2015, I challenged the then chairman of AFC on it and told him he was making a mistake. The third party would need to be independent. And I believe that in the context of Guyana politics, I'm not speaking about anywhere else, at this stage I have been persuaded that it would not be correct to open the door for negotiations after elections, given that it opens the risk that a voter who voted for a party may be taking a liberal step away from home base would be totally surprised at the outcome. I don't think that that is a tenable situation in Guyana.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I just want to cut in there. We go to a short commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion. And we also want to talk about ROPA, today's paper with Christopher Ram, a very interesting report in Kaichur News, so we want to talk a little about that as well when we come back. So we'll be back shortly. Don't go nowhere.
This is a Save the Date announcement. Couples, family, relatives, and friends, save the date. We are taking our culture, music, and food on our vacation in 2022. Enjoy a vacation plus special events and entertainments. Here are the choices. Guyana Excursion May 4th to May 11th. Indian Talent Competition July 14th to July 18th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Christian Community Week July 21st to July 25th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Curry Duck Curry Competition July 28th to August 1st in Cancun, Mexico. Caribbean Week August 4th to August 8th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Battle for the DJ Crown Soca, Indo, and Chutney Style August 11th to August 15th. Enjoy 5 days plus 4 nights all-inclusive vacation with your own cultural music, food, and entertainment. Meet and greet sessions with the performers and competition prizes. First place prize $2,000, second place $1,500, and third place $1,000. This is a save the date announcement by Globespan. More information will become available in December. Globespan, always on the cutting edge and serving you for over 27 years. Call 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. The Curry Roti Box is now available. Select your meal. Choose from chicken, duck, goat, or lamb curries, plus pepper pot, chicken tikka masala, lamb vindaloo, and roti. Your choice and your selection. Make up your own Curry Roti Box. We will ship directly to your home or job. Unbox your favorite curries, rotis, pastries, plus order your favorite West Indian sodas and much, much more on allfromonesupplier.com. Treat yourself or send the Curry Roti Box as a gift. Curry Roti Box is available with free shipping to all U.S. states and free delivery in New York. Order now your favorite curries, your fish, meats, pastries, sodas, and much more. Get all your West Indian and Indian food, plus your West Indian groceries from allfromonesupplier.com. It's free delivery and free shipping. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com and place your order today, or call 718-551-3292. Again, that's allfromonesupplier.com. Folks, the Nest Restaurant is the place to dine for Guyanese and Caribbean dishes. It is the best restaurant in Queens. The staff is courteous, and Dave, the owner, is always there to welcome you. So for a memorable dining experience, visit the Nest Restaurant located at 12717 101 Avenue, South Richmond Hill. Go and make a reservation today, or takeout. Call 718-847-4035.
Back to our audience, as we have three legal luminaries with us tonight, as you've been enjoying the discussion with Member of Parliament, Mr. Sanjeev Dattadin, Accountant and Attorney at Law, Mr. Christopher Ram, and Senior Counsel, Mr. Timothy Jonas. Gentlemen, I know we had that discussion, but we want to get into ROPA in this other segment. But before we go into that, Chris, if there is one thing that you want to change in the Constitution, what will it be? And what the purpose will that change give to the Guyanese people? Just one thing.
You know, I think I have a bee in my bonnet about that same 11B, because I think that could make fundamental differences. I know that Guyana, or again, I'm talking history.
Chris, can you say what 11B is?
11B that says that you have to be a party contesting in 6 of the geographical constituencies, representing 13 of the 25 seats.
So you want to change that?
I think we should have, like we have in local government, we have independents permitted to participate in the elections. I think if we do that, and I know Tim and I got the same kinds of objectives, but I believe that is the route I would use to getting into to change the political dynamics in the National Assembly. Because if you can get just 3 persons, 3 independent seats in the National Assembly, or ANO gets 3 seats or AFC gets 3 seats, and they stay independent, they could do a tremendous amount of work despite the strength of the PPP. Look, we must not underestimate the PPP. They know the constituencies, the Amerindians, the rice farmers, the sugar workers, the Hindu caste. Now you've got the Muslim class. It's a very systematic approach they have, but no system has been permanent except the Chinese think that theirs is going to outlast anything. But that would be my one.
Thank you so much. Timothy, what will be one article in the Constitution that you will change, and in changing it, what benefit will it have to the people of Guyana?
Chris can correct me. I'm not sure that reference he just made is constitutional.
It's legal. It's legal. 11B of the Representation of the People's Act.
Yes, it's statutory rather than constitutional.
Yes, yeah.
And I think Charles' question went to constitution, and I will agree with Sanjeev on this. There's not much in the Constitution when you look at it on its face that is offensive on its face. For me, the problem with our Constitution is that it's so unwieldy. It's got 100 and something articles, and many of the articles are meaningless.
200,
even a lawyer
200,
who's
200, Tim.
a lawyer who is trained to read this gobbledygook, yeah, eyes glaze over after a while, let alone a layman who doesn't want to spend more than half an hour perusing this thing. And to me, given its importance, the Constitution should be readable and easily accessible to everybody in the society. You mustn't hide it in 200 and something articles that's so unreadable that you need a degree to make sense of the thing. Simplicity is better, and I would get rid of 3/4 of this thing that has so many meaningless feel-good clauses that don't have any bite, don't have any enforceability. Land to the tiller, that kind of thing that just takes up space on paper. It needs to be simplified. That's the change I would make. Make it understandable to the people.
Sanjeev, is there any article that you would change the Constitution, and what benefit will that article have if it's changed the people of Guyana?
Well, you see, I agree with what Tim's saying about the Constitution. One of the things that happened to us historically, we have what are known as the fundamental rights provisions. And there were 2 Court of Appeal decisions by then Chancellor Messiah that says the rest of the Constitution didn't matter. And the only thing that was justiciable in the courts, to which the courts could give a remedy of, were the fundamental rights. So everything outside of what was provided as fundamental rights, which is 139 to 153, 152, and Article 40, everything that existed outside of that was thought to be irrelevant. When I was a student and when Mr. Jonas was a student, that's what we were taught. And that's what continued to happen until the CCJ came into being and started to apply every other constitutional provision. But what happened is the Constitution has many what are termed declaratory things in terms of local democratic organs and all these other things, and even the financial relations about budget and so. I understand why they're put there. They want to have constitutional protection so that they can't easily be amended by law. But what we should do is narrow down our Constitution to the fundamental rights, and whatever other rights we decide should be protected in that way. And the other provisions that relate to should be put in statutes that have the various protections that you need, 2/3 of Parliament to amend, whatever. You can do that with the statutes in any event. So that would make the Constitution not as unwieldy as it is, but it would also make it accessible to the individuals. The big thing about the Constitution and what it needs to address more than anything else is the determination of rights and time, especially criminal matters. But civil matters are going to become increasingly important. And if we don't get accountability in determination for disputes, not necessarily from judges alone, but the system, the provisions that relate to the system by how we deal with disputes and the time within which we deal with disputes and the resources which could be allocated to dealing with disputes, I think that would make the most significant difference to people. Because for example, if in our new economy, if we refer to it as that, there's going to be so much money tied up in contracts. You can't wait for the system to take 10 years to decide it. In criminal matters, it's unfair that people wait 8 and 10 years for their trials. These things shouldn't happen. What we need to do is those rights need to be supported and buttressed in a way that makes them time sensitive. Because we could trade any other commodity except time. We can't.
Excellent point, gentlemen. I'm glad you guys brought it so nicely for us so we understand it. Now, before we go into ROPA, Dr. Rose, and I'm sure you'll come in. If you and I commit a crime, we go to jail, right? We locked away for some time. When the government breached the Constitution, what remedies available to the people of Guyana and we have seen that in the coalition government, they've breached it so many times. And of course, we can talk about the PPP also breaching it in many ways as well. What remedy is available to the people? Sanjeev, you can start with that.
Well, that one's an easy one. It's vindicatory rights. The courts have long decided that you get vindicatory damages. which means it's to vindicate you for the wrong you've suffered. It's not contractual, it's not tortious, it's different. But in many cases, the principal remedy is the correction of whatever is the wrong, insofar as it can be done.
No, Sanjay, sorry. I'm talking about like when President Granger appointed GECOM chair unilaterally. That's breach of the Constitution. What remedy was available to the people except the CJ we had to go through a whole long process to the CCJ, and then they said, okay, now you cannot do that.
Well, the remedy in that case was the remedy we got to strike it down that he was unlawfully appointed. You see, public law rights and constitutional rights are usually to get the right which is guaranteed or promised to you by the law or the Constitution. So if you have claimed a breach, the remedy the court will give you is the remedy that says that your right has been breached, and they will vacate whatever has been done to breach your rights. That is the usual remedy in public law. Now, in remedies that relate to if you're incarcerated or if your property has been taken, then they can assess a value in addition to giving you those rights, and those are referred to as vindicatory damages. But the basic premise under the Constitution is, in addition to the damages that you will get, the principal remedy is to correct the breach. So if Granger, as he did, wrongly appointed a GECOM chairman, what the court did was struck it down, said this appointment is unlawful. He has to go home. His appointment is not valid. So that would be the usual remedy. That is in fact the remedy throughout the Commonwealth. That's a very common process in public law.
Well, good, Sanjay, but Timothy, in answering that question, no penalty for the person who did the appointment. So he breached the Constitution. The court said, okay, he was wrong, but he just went on still being president until the election. Is there any remedy?
Charles, I think that what your question does is it mixes up what a crime is with what might not have been properly done within the law, and they're two separate issues. An act can say you mustn't kill, and if you kill, you've committed an offense, and you will be punished by imprisonment or whatever. So a crime is committed, and the punishment is set out. But when the Constitution says that the president shall consult to the leader of the opposition and with his agreement appoint the chairman, a crime isn't being set out there. And the Constitution doesn't say if he fails to do so, he commits a crime and therefore must go to jail. So we can't jump make that leap of logic that because somebody else says, well, if you drive dangerously, there's an act that says you must go to jail. There's no act that says if you appoint a chairman without the consent of the leader of the opposition, you must go to jail. There's no act that says an offense is committed. The concept behind that legislation is different. The concept behind those rules are, this is what we need for administration. You're the boss, you're the president, consult with the opposition, appoint a chairman. That's what the rules tell you to do. But it's a far step to say if you don't do it, it's a crime. That's not what it's saying. Parliament is setting out that procedure for good administration of the country. Unfortunately, very often statutory authorities, including the president, exercise their powers in good faith sometimes and in bad faith in other times in a way that's wrong. The courts are there to correct that, but it's a big stretch to say they've committed a crime. That's not the case.
And you're right, I'm conflating the two things. But in Chris, in answering that question, when President Granger appointed the GECOM chair, he made appointments that create this confusion at the 2020 election. I'm not saying, the appointment caused it, but the people who he put in place, they caused it. So there is actually no politicians went to prison for breaching the Constitution. And I know, as Sanjay said, it's criminal law is different from the constitutional law. I agree with that. But shouldn't there be penalty for politicians when they breach the Constitution?
I think it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to get anything like that. Look, the two options you have: impeachment, which is practically impossible on our Constitution. Vote them out the next time. they've sworn to uphold the Constitution. That's what they've taken an oath to do. But that's our jurisprudence, and we have to live with it.
Okay, Dr. Rose.
Yes. Okay. I have a question here, and Mr. Ram, I'll start with you, followed by Mr. Jonas, and Sanjeev, I'll leave you for the third last. It has been reported that the chairperson of GECOM, Justice Claudette Singh, knew of the results of the 2020 election the next day on March the 3rd, but she delayed to make the announcement which party won, which give the opposition, which give the government, APNU, the coalition government, the opportunity to engage the courts. Now, Mr. Christopher Ram, do you think she is fit and proper for the position, barring Granger term, for the position as chairperson? And do you think she should resign?
I think she should be recalled because she was a very, very big part of the problem. She went missing in action at critical points in time. If she had asserted her authority, we may have been spared much of that 5 months of agony that our country suffered. And she had a constitutional duty. She's a former judge of the Court of Appeal. She must have known what was going on around her. And if she didn't know, well, then it's even worse.
Mr. Jonas?
She's not fit to be chairperson of GECOM.
Mr. Jonas, do you think she is fit and proper to be the chairperson of GECOM?
I hesitate to jump to a conclusion, and I'll tell you why, Aspen. If I'm chairman, and I know what the results are because I've done my job and I've kept track of the results as they came in and the statements of poll and all of that. The procedure is that the officer from the region counts it in the presence of the party's representatives and announces it. Now, I don't have any prior knowledge that some officer might not do his job well or some other officer might rig it. But as chairman, I know that that's the procedure. And I am not going to jump the gun and say to somebody, I count the thing on a computer and therefore I'll announce the elections before that man has done his job, because then I look like I'm doing something wrong. You have to follow the procedure. And the procedure required Mr. Mingo, in the presence of the party representatives, to count the statements of poll properly and to announce the result. And the chairman, Claudette Singh, had no place of changing that procedure or upstanding what was being done. If she had prior knowledge, well, then she's complicit in the fraud, but I certainly am not going to accuse her of that. I don't think she had prior knowledge. But I will say in her defense that it was not her place to jump up before Mingo did his job to say she already knows what the result is, because that would be upstaging the process and leading to criticisms which would be justifiable. Now, after Mingo started doing what he did, I would have liked to see much more of Justice Claudette Singh in the process. When I hear about bed sheets, if I was the chairman, I'd have been sitting down in that room looking at Mingo face to face again, especially after the Chief Justice made her ruling. We didn't see that, and I don't know why. But I would not jump to a conclusion from the outset. I would have liked to see stronger action later on.
Mr. Dattadin?
Well, you said that there have been reports that she knew the result the day after as to what it was.
Based on the statement of polls received by GECOM.
Well, I don't know if that is true or not. I could tell you that I had an idea what the result was in very certain terms of numbers, because the PPPC was well aware of that. And I think they communicated that in their own way to people, because you can't announce results, only GECOM can do it. But I think that was communicated, and everyone has seen that picture where that was done. But the bottom line to it is, my understanding was that the CEO had stopped giving to the commission the SOPs. So I don't know whether she would have known or if she would have known, but she could not have known without a verification process that needed to be undertaken. But I say this, after things were going, things became strange. When Mingo stopped the count at 9 p.m. on, I believe, the Tuesday to say that people were tired, that's unheard of in GECOM. They're all aware of what happens in the days following an election. Then not starting back at 9 in the morning as he promised, then coming and leaving and going to the hospital because he was apparently ill. Then that entire day I was there, and they didn't start any counting until after 9 p.m. and they stopped again at 11 o'clock after they'd done some SOPs. So in reality, as chairperson of the commission, I thought that there should have been interventions there which were within the powers of what the commission could have done and the chairperson could have done, and directed people to do their job. Now, there might have been other forces at work and other things that I might not be aware of, but I can tell you this, that if you're only thinking about the law and the application of ROPA and the Constitution, the powers were clear, the powers were stated, the powers were expressed as to what the commission and the chairperson could have done to stop the country going through all that it did. Now, in the end, our constant thing was, would the chairperson or would the CEO do his job? And essentially, that should never be a position that an entire nation could be held to ransom by one rogue civil servant. That's what it amounts to. And we shouldn't have that. But the laws were clear, and the laws had set out what should have been done. I have never received or become aware of an explanation as to why the chairperson was unavailable at times, why she didn't convene the commission and have the commission vote and issue directions as were required to get things done. Why those things were not done, I have never received a satisfactory answer. I've heard lots of speculation. Now, if you say that as a result of that, whether she is fit to continue in the job, we're caught with the arguments that go both ways. In the end, she had not known, if it is she had not known, by any verifiable process until the recount had been completed, that these were in fact the results. And every step she took after that was to tell Lowenfield, who was the CEO, this is your job, and would you please do your job? He submitted one set of recount, and she said, no, you need to go back and do your job. He then came back with another set and said he didn't understand. She said, what I told you to do is very clear. You need to do your job. Now that absorbed from July to August, from June to August. So that absorbed about 6 weeks of time in the time that she afforded him. Now, she might have been too generous to afford him, since every child in Guyana knew the numbers. But I would say that at the point, from what we could tell, at least I could tell, that she was aware of the numbers and the results. She insisted thereafter that those who acted under her supervision did what they were supposed to do. Now, it took longer than any of us wanted it to happen. It took longer. We weren't sure that it would happen. But did she, from when we knew she knew what the position was, did she do her job? It would appear so. Now, it's always difficult, Dr. Rhodes, it's always difficult when people will want to say how you should do what you did, even though you did what is right. And I have tried to make it a practice of not judging how people choose to do things, because I'm sure if it were up to me, I might not have done it the way that people would have liked as well. So that's always, so I try to look at substance. And if you look at substance, perhaps she did her job. And the question is about removal. I don't think it would be fair in that context. But again, if you know things that I don't know, and if you know that influences and games were afoot, then I'm willing to listen. But as far as I'm aware, I thought she should have done more. But from when it was clear what the result was, I thought she took a particular line to say, do what you should do.
Okay. Mr. Jonas, I want you to begin answering this question. Given the fact that there will be a new CEO, Chief Election Officer, and a deputy, and many others, senior position, yet 78% of the people in Guyana do not believe that GECOM is capable of holding a fair and free elections. What should be done to convince these people?
Well, I think you got to include me in that percentage. I'm not convinced GECOM can hold a fair election right now. You see, it wasn't just the few people at the top. What was allowed to happen when Mr. Granger opened the door by introducing Patterson, and then Patterson brought in Lowenfield, and it started from there, was that employees were introduced that were willing and complicit all the way down. So GECOM as an entity, the secretariat was compromised. And there has to be a spring cleaning in GECOM. The difficulty is that it's easy to say you got to clean it up. But when you throw out the bad, how do you know you're not bringing in more bad? The dishonesty was there. The dishonesty is not one-sided. The dishonesty is on both sides. And both sides are willing to compromise with integrity in certain areas. So we know that we have to get rid of what is there. But how do you have a cleansing process to make sure that the people who come in have the integrity? I don't know the answer to that. I hope they get it right. But what I'm sure of is that the process has to be transparent. Every single aspect of what is done in an election must be open to scrutiny. Video recordings must be done. Computer records must be used. Information must be put up on websites. Everyone must see what is happening at every step of the way. As long as you have closed door arrangements where people are excluded, there is scope for problems. So transparency is the first step.
What do you think should be done to convince 78% of the population, Mr. Jonas said he is one of them, that GECOM can hold fair and free elections in Guyana?
That question is directed to me?
Yes.
You know, we had an attempt in 2015 when the chief elections officer sought to do his own form of rigging. We have had it in 2020. Actually, the guardrail worked in 2015 better than it did work in 2020. If you look at the elections over the period of time, 1997, all elections have issues, all. But I think GECOM on the whole, and that is based on reports by several observers, has conducted elections in a reasonably competent manner. We've had rogue elements in 2020, and we had rogue element in 2015. But I think if we allow the system to work, and this is why I take the strong line on the chairperson. She was the one independent person. You had 3 on one side, you had 3 on the other side. She could have, under Article 62 and 162, is the commission that is responsible, and the commission should have stepped in. The commissioner should have stepped in, but it's nonsense. It's clear that these persons in the 2020 elections felt they could get away with it. They, in fact, got away with it for close to 5 months until somehow there was some epiphany on that Sunday morning, and suddenly Granger said, well, you know, I think I'm going to respect the elections. So what I would say, GECOM needs a human resources audit. We need to know what has been going on there. We need to know the extent to which that organization is infested and infected. We need to know its employment policies. I mean, look how GECOM is selecting its shortlisting, and it's rejecting any attempt to professionalize the approach, get some independent assistant. Why not? So I believe that overall, GECOM post 92 has held reasonably efficient elections. All of us have had the opportunity to go and vote. It was not like running through rings of fire, but there were rogue elements, and the commission, and it's because of this structure of the commission. You have 3 people on one side want to support, want their side to win. 3 people on the other side want their side to win, and you have 1 chairperson. And if that chairperson doesn't do his or her work well, you have issues, because you cannot then, if the chief elections officer is still subordinate to the commission. It's the commission that has the constitutional duty, independent supervision, and exercise general direction and supervision over registration and the administrative conduct of all elections of members of the National Assembly. And this is why I took a strong line. And, you know, I was with the private sector. I know we've been begging and pleading to get the chairperson to do her work. She did not do it. And we can't sugarcoat it. But I believe if we can deal with some of these, if we can make sure that, and the courts, you know, what has come out, the good that has come out from those legal challenges, spurious as though they might have been, is that issues have been clarified. And so some of those things ought not to happen again. The court has pronounced, and hopefully, if we respect the rule of law, those decisions will be observed, like how we observed the Esther Pereira case, for example. We always talk, well, there you are, you're stuck with that decision until you change it. So I am not part of that 78% that feel that GECOM cannot conduct elections. Exclude me from that, not in my name.
Okay. Mr. Datadin, the structure of GECOM, 6 commissioners, 3 one side, 3 on the other side, and the chairperson in the middle. Do you think that structure should be changed?
I put it to you this way. I don't see how that structure could, at present, be altered to the benefit of Guyanese. I know that there is a school of thought, and there is a group of persons who say, well, we should have independent commissioners. Now, where are we going to find these independent commissioners? Where are we going to find these people in the current climate of Guyana? And where are we going to find sufficient of them that will execute, have the experience, and do the job? That's the first challenge. The second thing is, the political parties that exist at present are the ones who are, I don't want to say most knowledgeable, but they're the ones who've been through this up and down in the practice of what it is. If what you're saying is that the commission should have persons who could offer advice at commission meetings, etc., then yes, perhaps. But the commission, the rules that set up for that the commission is set up for, the way it is done, and if the people who are there don't go rogue, the commission is quite capable of discharging its obligations. And it has done so since 1992 to present. Now, the idea that you have, that what you must have is other than the political parties there, and you must have civil society of some sort running the elections commission in Guyana, pays no heed to our history, pays no heed to our past and our experiences. We are different that way. the polarization, I don't believe that you will find people who are independent and equipped to do that. And I do not think that it should be relinquished from the political participants. Now, including more of the political participants could be useful. Including more of the people who will go to an election could be useful. And a formula could be found whereby if you've been in an election before and you've garnered so many votes that you are allowed to participate. Those models, but that will involve an amendment of the Constitution of Guyana. And that constitutional amendment will require 2/3 of the Assembly to be done. So it can't be effected by a government as presently exists. It has to be across the board. But GECOM, the laws that existed for GECOM in the last elections were clear. People went rogue. They clearly disobeyed the laws. There are amendments now that are being discussed to improve on the language, to improve so that there can't be as much play as to it not having said exactly this. And our law is now akin to a civil code. It is much more detailed and it expresses a lot more. But you can't put everything in the law or the regulations too. And I am aware that people, including Chris, have a comment about the penalties and that people wouldn't want to do work for the penalties. But as we were earlier this evening, before we went on air, I agree. You have nothing to fear if you intend to do nothing. The penalty could be debt. If you intend to do nothing and you're not going to do anything, then what would be the difficulty? Speaking for myself, personally, I favor that the penalty be civil forfeiture. You should forfeit your assets, whatever assets you have. Prison, maybe, but I think you should feel it. You should lose your assets. Okay. But that's speaking for me. That is not as popular a view. But GECOM, Dr. Rose, has got to function in a way that garners public confidence. The reason public confidence is low now is because for 4 months after the election, the undermining GECOM, the entire nation watched in disbelief as GECOM allowed itself to be twisted into contortions. And then before that, from the Charandas No Confidence, the entire nation watched as GECOM played politics, for want of a better phrase. GECOM did not function as the people of the country expected it to function. So we need to change that so that it does function the way people and meets the expectation of the people.
Okay, quickly, this is a yes or no question. The government has proposed to sectionalize the counts in Region 4. Georgetown North should be counted separately, Georgetown South, East Coast, and East Bank. Do you agree, Mr. Jonas? There's a quick yes or no answer before Charles comes in.
A lot of people have misunderstood that. As far as I understand what is intended, the number of seats in Region 4 doesn't change. Just the decentralization of how it's counted.
Right.
And that's just an administrative question. It's greater administration. It's more people involved in the process, or possibly more scope for mistakes. But by decentralizing, you don't have a central Mingo figure. You will need 4 Mingos. Okay. And maybe that's what the government has in mind. But we got lots of Mingos in Guyana on both sides of the fence. Okay. I think we need a better solution overall.
Mr. Ram?
It's purely an administrative matter. And I think it can be replicated in other regions as well.
Mr. Dalton?
I agree with it. Absolutely. It's administrative. But you see what it is designed or how it came about. If I could tell you basically what happened. If you were in the Ashman's building, those are the 4 quote-unquote wards that exist in Region 4. So what they were doing in Ashman's building that day is they were counting in various areas. So the count that went on in North Georgetown and South Georgetown was effectively smooth. That went on in accordance with the SOPs. When the shenanigans started is when the East Bank count got to Diamond, and when the East Coast count, nearly all of the East Coast was jettisoned in when it happened. Now, there were perceptions which bore out to be reality about which party garnered more votes in those areas. What this will do is simply this. The largest counting that must take place of votes in Region 4, which is Region 4. I mean, a village in India counts more votes than us in a night, but we take so long. We have not mastered it as yet. But what it does is it puts it in 4 separate areas so it can go simultaneously. The intent is that what happens to the 4 wards of Region 4 is that it moves simultaneously. So there wouldn't be any advantage garnered by one side thinking this is our strength and that is our strength, and we should count that and then mash up the system so that we're ahead. That is the mischief that would be put away. It does not change how many votes you get. It does not change anybody's votes. All it does is it allows for the counting in Region 4 to go 3 times faster.
Take it away, Charles.
All right, gentlemen. We're closing. We actually only have about 5 minutes more to go on the program. In our the next 5 minutes, gentlemen, Chris Turam had a great article today in the Kaichur News, and he was speaking about what is not in the ROPA recommendation that Sanjeev just talked about. One of them was of course, the commissioners, how to select commissioners. That has been left out. Financing of parties. We know, we have heard stories of, the PEP and the PNC getting millions and millions of US dollars from outside source, and then they have to, now patronize those people, and because they're breaching the act. The act is saying one thing and they're doing something else. In Timothy, in closing, and let us quickly talk about that. What do you think should be in the ROPA that is not yet presented at Sanjeev? Highlight a couple of them. Yeah, Timothy, you.
One problem that I have with what's being thrown out so far is it's piecemeal. If we talk about elections and tightening the system, I think we need to do it holistically. For example, the APNU supporters had heard their leaders' complaints about the list and they had people voting. So we need to figure out a structure to sanitize the list, which is continuously updated and continuously renewed. But there is some credence to the argument that because so many Guyanese migrate, running away from these 2 parties' leadership, that they die abroad and their deaths are not registered. And therefore, the system of removing deceased persons from the list is not efficient. Now, I don't think that should be ignored. That should be dealt with. But it's not dealt with because only a few amendments to ROPA have been put in and not a holistic view taken. And I really think that when the reform is put to the public and put to the opposition parties, it needs to be done in a holistic way so that we can completely assess the system and look to see where we are plugging the gaps. This piecemeal approach does not work, and I think it gears a lot to politics. For example, that district liability penalty clauses that talks about 10 years and $10 million for every offense under the sun, whether or not the offense is done deliberately or with an intent to deceive, or that kind of thing can't fly. It is there to cater for the masses who want to see firmness and strength, but it's not meaningful. And it's time we stop playing politics and find real solutions.
Chris, I know you did the article today. Is there anything you want to talk about the article? I know it's widely read. People talk about it.
Let me disclaim. It was issued by a civil society group called Article 13. I'm part of that group. So don't give me any credit that isn't due to me. Now, I am participating with the Private Sector Commission on a review of this legislation, this proposed legislation. And like my friend Sanjeev did just now about the 7%, he suddenly comes up and says, "Oh, we're gonna negotiate over it." Mr. Nandalal, another friend, appeared before the Private Sector Commission this morning. He said, "What are you all worried about? The changes will come in two tranches." They never said it before. Now we hear that, oh, this is only the first step to deal with the issues that arose out of the elections. I mention it because it was an open public consultation with the Private Sector Commission. It wasn't like I am breaching any confidence. So now the Attorney General has put something completely different. All right, this is only stage one. I actually have the note. This is the first tranche. Well, I said, when are we going to get the other tranches? He couldn't say. So I am not sure. I know we missed significant elements of the kind of changes we really do want, and I want to publicly congratulate ANOG. ANOG, I understand. I haven't seen it. I don't know if they audited it and so on. I'm not looking for work. That they submitted an election expense report as they are required to do by law. We treat the APNU, PNCR, PPP, PPP Civic, treat laws as matters of convenience from time to time. And that is not what the rule of law is all about.
Sanjeev, in closing, anything to add to ROPA that is already in?
Well, Charles, the reason why it can't be all done at the same time is very simple. There are some things, like with the commission and the membership and anything that relates to that, we can't touch that without touching the Constitution. Those involve amendments that must relate to the Constitution, and for that 2/3 majority of Parliament is required. These amendments relate exactly from the point of registration going all the way down to how the declaration happens. It indeed focuses a lot on what was experienced in the last time, but that could be corrected by simple legislation. And it doesn't change drastically what was there. It only makes it difficult for you to conveniently twist the interpretations of what happened before. So they've put in time limitations. For example, now instead of only nailing the SOP onto the building where it was counted, it has to be published electronically on their website within a certain amount of time, so the whole world can see what it is. So these are the things that could be done at this stage. I hear what both my colleagues are saying about wanting more. This is what is geared towards a specific part of the process. Anything that goes beyond, you got to be always circumscribed by the Constitution. The Constitution gives GECOM the power to conduct these things. So you can't do anything to interfere with GECOM's authority. You have to only pass laws that does not interfere with their authority to conduct the elections. And for constitutional amendments, of course, we'll have to get 2/3 of the House to agree. So that's not something that the government alone can undertake.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev. Gentlemen, it's been a great pleasure to have the three of you here this evening. The time has run so fast on us. I know Dr. Rose have a lot more questions. I do have a lot more questions too. But you'll have to come back sometime in the future. Let's continue the discussion. So Sanjeev, thank you so much. Timothy, thank you. Chris, thank you. Dr. Rose, anything in closing as we close?
Thank you all. Good night.
So I want to thank all these three gentlemen, three eminent lawyers from Guyana, be here tonight. I hope our audience will be pleased with the answers. And I think they did a very, very fine job in answering the question. They were short and to the point. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Timothy. We want to thank you so much again, and to Devin and to all our viewers out there. Thank you so much. God bless you until next week again. Bye.
Good night, mate.